Hey, welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Burdinsky, and somewhere on that split screen, if I can get him on, is the infamous Christopher K. Chartel. Chris, at the council meeting on Tuesday night, an issue before the council was whether or not the town council should transfer about $1.6 million from the general fund into the Boards of Ed 2% fund. And it was a spirited discussion. You made the motion to effectuate that transfer in the 2% fund. We're going to go over some of the issues, but I wanted to lay out some background so everyone knows what we're talking about. 2% fund, that kind of thing. The 2% fund is a savings account that the Board of Education is allowed to maintain pursuant to state statute. Statute was passed, 6-7 years ago, whatever the exact number is. And the statute says that the legislative body of the town may transfer over to the Board of Education for its deposit in the 2% fund up to 2% of the prior year's appropriation for education. And once that money is in the 2% fund, the Board of Education has pretty much uncontrolled discretion as to how it wants to use that money. And so the issue in front of you guys was, would you rather have $1.6 million in the general fund? Maybe it could be used for tax relief, or would you rather have it in the Board of Ed's 2% fund? And part and parcel of that issue, I guess, is, does the Board of Ed have any money on hand now? And if it does, maybe they don't need any more. And if they got extra money, what would they do with it? What would they do with it? Chris, before I add some more background, I just want to ask it, have I framed the issues, generally speaking, in a fair way?
Yes.
Okay, so a little more background. The first year that the town council authorized an appropriation into the 2% fund was 2015. And since then, up until November 2019, the average, I ran the numbers last night, later than I should have, but I ran the numbers. The average authorization by the council for that 2% fund was $632,299. There are some years that were more and some years that was less, but $632,299 was the average. The expenditures out of that fund as of November last year, this is on a fiscal year basis, was about half that, 311,657. So going in was an average of 632,000, and using rounded numbers, being spent every year was 312,000. I didn't run those calculations myself. Those were given to me by the comptroller last year about this time, Chris, when we talked about it. And with more money going in than going out, it wouldn't surprise anyone to learn that the fund balance of the 2% fund has grown since its beginning in 2015 from rounded numbers 50,000 to 3 million, right after you guys, the council, authorized another approximately $500,000 into the 2% fund. I think that vote was October, November 2019. So Chris, let's flip it back to you, because I've been hogging the stage here. You like the idea of transferring this money out of the grasp of taxpayers and into the grasp of the Board of Ed. Go over it. Tell me why.
I care about the children.
Okay, and no one else does, right?
How can you, no, this is, why do I, well, first of all, let's just present the historical context. This
Sure.
is as you pointed out, it was a setup. It was a state statute or state driven policy that we set up because the state allowed us to. And what it does is it allows the Board of Ed to keep a little of their surplus each year. And so what that means is that they end up spending it on what they would call one-time things, things that aren't capital, things that you can't bond. So that's sort of the groundwork. This is the last. What's today? Today's Thursday. So when we made this decision on Tuesday night, it was the 7th time the town council has had to make this decision in 7 years. As you pointed out, I think you said 2014. So it was the 7th year in a row. And so there's been no, in terms of taking it out of the grasp of taxpayers, as you so eloquently put it, the 6 previous times, without that much fanfare, the town council, and I didn't go back and look at the votes. I was on the council for at least 4 or 5 of them. My first year on the council
I
was.
can stipulate if you want that it's always been,
No, I'm just saying
you can't shove the money over fast enough by unanimous vote.
Frame it in these dramatic terms that,
I'll stipulate to that.
the blockbuster, there's these terms, and really this has not been a big, and now should it be a big deal is a separate discussion, which you're going to get into, I'm sure. My point is though, so you asked me what was my mindset, what was behind me making the motion and supporting it. I just want to frame for the viewers that, number one, this was never really a big deal for the town council to do this. It was part of an arrangement or a past practice. Now, the big deal this year was that it was more money than it usually was, as you pointed out. We were being asked to give them their surplus was 1.6 million was available to them from their surplus. So typically, that's 3 times the amount they typically get. Well, why did they have that much money? Because of everything with coronavirus, excess in the transportation contract, all these variables. So I did ask them for information. I actually asked a week ago for more information on what did they have in the account today, as you alluded to. They walked through it, and there is money, about 1.4 million in the account prior to our vote. They had plans to spend it down to 0, as they always do. And I don't think anyone thinks they are going to spend it entirely down to 0, but they gave me enough confidence in that, as well as the uncertainty with COVID, that the COVID expenses are a moving target, that I felt comfortable. Once I heard their explanation, I did feel comfortable voting to do it, as I have every other time this would come before us as a council.
Yeah, so I want to highlight some of the things that you said. Certainly every year this has come up. The council has pretty much automatically, and in large part without question, agreed to the request by the Board of Ed to transfer their surplus over from the general fund to the 2% account. That's for sure. And I can understand very easily why the Board of Ed would have a sense of expectation. It's happened every year before this, so why not this year?
It's more than a sense of expectation, though. It affects. Let's just be clear. It affects their budgeting, because there are things they intentionally do not put in their budget because they know they're going to run a surplus. So I just want to make that it's more than just an expectation. It does influence their budget.
Well, I'm not going to agree with that, but I'm not going to argue the point. I mean, if they go into their budget with the position that they have an absolute right to get that money and they budget accordingly, they do so at their peril. They haven't read the they haven't read the the statute, which says it's up to the discretion of the council, and so the council is, use a legal term, is not stopped, is not prevented year after year from looking at what's going on. I mean, this is the largest, as you point out, the largest transfer ever made. More than double. Certainly more than double the largest transfer ever made.
Their needs are also different from other years, though. On the other side of the ledger with COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty around the funds they received, if they can keep those funds, that they have to spend them down in 6 weeks. So on the other side of the ledger, yes, it's a bigger amount, but it's also, their need is also much different than it's been any other year. Just want to point that out.
And again, I don't want to argue with you. I'm just not going to agree with you because I didn't feel that their presentation was all that persuasive, but you did. We'll just have to leave it like that. And part of the reason why I didn't, again, why is this year different from all other years? We have the data that shows they spend about half of what they're given each year, but and when they passed their budget in 2020, COVID was in full rage. So, you can't say they were blindsided by COVID. They,
I can absolutely say that. They had no idea from Governor Lamont up until
Yeah.
5 weeks before school started how they could run their system. Were we going to have a hybrid model, in person, completely virtual? The state of Connecticut deferred that. So no, completely. That's not true. That is not true to say that when they passed their budget, COVID was in full bloom and they knew everything they knew. No, they didn't. They knew nothing. They knew nothing. I'm just pointing that out.
Board of Ed knew nothing. Okay, I can accept that for the purposes of this discussion. So the question became at some point in the evening, if you get the 1.6 million from the general fund, what would you do with it? And you and I had a discussion off camera to prepare for the show, and I think we've come to that rare situation where we have an agreed upon state of facts, a stipulation of facts that I emailed to you earlier today. And based on the information provided by Dr. Menzo at the council meeting, assuming that the Board of Ed doesn't get any money on Tuesday night, just assuming that arguendo, because that's the choice, you don't have to do it. And if the board applies all their grant money to COVID expenses, then they would have a cost overrun of about $1.1 million. Their expenses due to COVID would outstrip their grants, their governmental grants, by 1.1 million. And that's what we agreed to. Now, you add to the mix the 1.6 that the council just gave them on Tuesday night, and we find that the board would have a surplus on the COVID expenses by about $500,000. So the net effect of your vote was to give them a surplus of about $500,000, which they add to all the other money that they have. I know you don't agree with that. No, we agreed to the facts, so you have to agree to that. But your reaction?
I agree that that's the situation as of Tuesday night. As I also said, and as was said Tuesday night, the COVID expenses are moving the front number, and the state funding was based on a one question application they filled out in the summer when they thought they were going to a different model than what they ended up doing because the governor changed his mind the last minute. So I don't know how much of that state funding is going to stick, if they can keep all of it or not. So I agree to the facts, to exactly what you said as of today. But some of it can change. But yeah, I agree with that.
Right. So the issue in front of the council, when you made the motion to transfer that 1.6 million, the issue was, do we want the Board of Ed to have another $500,000 surplus on top of the money it already has? Christina Tata said, no, we don't need to give them another $500,000 that they, by their own data, they do not need. By their own information, you do not need. They do not need. And the rest of the council said, yeah, let's give them more than what they really need based on their data. Want to put up the slide briefly that shows the history of that 2% fund. And it shows the, as of Tuesday night, that the fund balance went up to 3 million. And as you have eloquently said, they have uses for all that. You know, they have expectations as to how they're going to use it. But there was an interesting discussion about part of the money, $600,000 that the Board of Ed said they have to hold in reserve. It's sort of a contingency account. And it had to do with some lawsuit, a mysterious lawsuit. And I say mysterious because it is a mysterious lawsuit that they're accumulating money for. And we've got two clips going back to back, and I want you to listen to these two clips about that lawsuit. Here we go.
A good 600,000 of that is not going to be available to the Board of Education because we're going to have to use that to pay off the special ed settlement that was the national lawsuit against districts for providing services for students over the age of 22. So that money, we're not looking to use that for anything other than to cover the cost of that lawsuit. Our district right now is estimated to owe about $599,000. So that will be depreciated by that $599,000, leaving us approximately $50,000 in the special ed account.
the $600,000 settlement, is this something that's certain, that's going to be coming within the next year? Because if that fund only had 308,000 on April 27th, and that was deemed adequate by the Board of Ed, now because we got the CARES Act grant, it's up to almost 650,000. So what's the exact status of that $600,000 payout?
We're all still waiting to hear. It's a national lawsuit against every school district. We weren't personally named. Some districts in the state of Connecticut were, but we weren't. So we're responsible to whatever settlement is agreed upon. So we're in a holding pattern. We work with Janice Small at the town. She's been part of the conversations as well as our own board attorney. So at this point, our estimate based on our special education services is the $599,000, approximately $600,000 that we believe we owe.
Okay, so in that first little clip, Dr. Menzo is saying that there's some sort of a national lawsuit going on. Well, actually, I'll combine the information of the two clips. There's a national lawsuit going on. Wallingford was not named in the lawsuit, but a lot of other school districts in the state were named, and that the Board of Ed and its attorneys have calculated that they're going to owe about $599,000. That may be the agreed upon amount. When we don't know when this is all going to be needed. Dr. Menzo really didn't address that, but he did say that Janice Small had been in the conversation. Of course, she was not. That's just not so. Janice Small was not in the conversation about this lawsuit, and the law department really didn't know what Dr. Menzo was talking about. But when I say this is sort of mysterious, I think this is sort of odd, and let me just take a minute as to why. There's one lawsuit that I think that Dr. Menzo is talking about. It fits his description. It's a lawsuit where a lot of school districts in the state were named, but Wallingford wasn't, and it is a national lawsuit. The problem comes is that it's a brand new lawsuit, and that could take 5 years to unravel. I mean, you look at the opioid lawsuits that you guys discussed. This is a lawsuit across the country against a ton of school districts. It could take forever. So why accumulate all that money now when the time for the settlement may be years away? In addition, in that lawsuit, if this is the one he is referring to, there's a motion to dismiss that's been filed. We're going to see a decision probably in the next month. Why tell the Wallingford Town Council that you owe $600,000 for a lawsuit when there's a motion to dismiss pending? And if that motion to dismiss is granted and the lawsuit ends, they're not going to come back to you and say, oops, we were wrong. Here's your $600,000 back. So I think it was incumbent on the Board of Ed to give you a little more pertinent information. It was certainly incumbent on the town councilors to ask for that information. And if $600,000 was in front of the town council during tax time, and someone just casually said, oh, we're going to need this, are you telling me that you would just say, oh, yeah, that's okay, we don't need to know too much about it, keep your $600,000, or would you want to know more?
I want to know more. I mean, I think that we certainly can go back in 6 months when we do the budget and look at it then. And if this lawsuit is, as you describe, it's kind of a phantom lawsuit, or it's not going to affect us, we could use that in our own budget deliberations, or the mayor could do it before it even gets to us. So I think it's one of those, you're right about asking questions. I think as part-time counselors, we're hit with all this information, and at some point, you can ask, at some point there's a matter of when someone says there's a lawsuit, okay, there's a lawsuit. It's like, it's one variable of many. It never occurred to me to question them on the lawsuit. When they invoked Janice Small's name, the mayor didn't speak up, Jerry Farrell Sr. didn't speak up, Vinnie Cervoni didn't speak, nobody spoke up and said, oh, hold on a minute. There was none of that. So Craig Fishbein didn't question it. So, I mean, so I'm sitting there, I mean, I guess we should have questioned the lawsuit, I guess. I took it at face value.
Yeah.
Therein was my error, I guess.
Well, 8.5. Christina asked a couple of questions, but
not about the lawsuit.
You had a lot. Yeah, she just wanted to know when it's going to be settled, or
Yeah. Well, yeah, right,
right. But you're right. Even that was skimpy. Well, hopefully there's a lesson there. It's
a teachable moment, as Counselor Testa talked. There's the teaching we need. Maybe that's what we need.
There's the teaching you need. A little more background about this 2% fund. Some people are confused that there's an ordinance in play that requires or something the town council to give this money, but there absolutely is no ordinance. It's a year-to-year policy that it's up to the discretion of the council whether or not to do it. We kind of covered that in the earlier part of the show. And that leads us to a exchange between Christina Tata and Dr. Menzo about the consequences of this vote. What happens to does the council have a right not to do it? We'll discuss it after the clip. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
I know you said you're not asking for money, but in essence, it is asking for taxpayer money, because it's $1.6 million that would go back into the general fund.
No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. I'm sorry, but it wouldn't go back in the general fund, because under statutory rights, we have a right to ask for these funds, and we've gotten them since 2012. So it wouldn't go necessarily back to the general fund. And it would also put our district behind the 8 ball. We would not be able to do the renovations that the town council does not give us funds for. So technically, we could have continuing deteriorating schools and eroding schools, but over the last several years, we've been able to use these funds to offset the fact that we haven't been getting capital funds from the town. So it could go back, I guess, if you wanted to take it back. But again, that's not the practice that has occurred. That's not the ordinance that the mayor had signed back in, I believe, 2012. To allow that fund to be carried over. Again, I understand your concern about it. And again, we could be the other town. I guess the other option is we could be coming to you and asking for $5 million tonight.
Okay, so I had to put in some fact checks there, because there was confusion about the existence of an ordinance. There is no ordinance. And I had to also put in some context about how much money the Board of Ed actually has on hand for capital projects, because Dr. Menzo was making it appear that the Board of Education has been starved of capital funds for capital improvements. And maybe that's his perspective, but there are some facts out there that might contradict that. Over the course of the years, the town has issued bonding, sold bonds in the open market, and the proceeds have been moved over the Board of Ed for their use for capital improvements, and it's been in phase 1, 2, and 3. And in some cases, they've used almost all of it, but in other cases, they have not. And so there's a lot of money left over, and these are in Board of Ed capital accounts, which also goes under the radar a lot, because the council doesn't notice them, because the source of money is not taxes. The source of money is bonding. And in addition, the mayor takes from the CRRA fund, which is a fund set up when CRRA discontinued the trash plant. We had a right to a lot of money, like $13 million. And that's sitting in a fund. And the mayor very frequently moves money from that CRRA fund so the board can spend money on capital projects. That wasn't mentioned. So I needed to add that because just the way the council meeting was left, it would say, my God, you have to give the board 1.6 million. They don't have enough money for capital repairs, capital improvements, things like that. And I just can't agree with that. Can't let that go. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm looking at the numbers now that I have. There is over, millions, 2.3 from the CRA fund since 2014. And I know that because I was on the Board of Ed when that started. But I think, well, I think there's a clarification very quickly I'd like to make, though, which I think Dr. Menzo meant. I think he misspoke when he used the word capital. And I alluded to this earlier. Capital refers to projects that can be bonded, big ticket items, stuff that has a lifespan of 15, 20 years. That's what you bond. And you're right about what you just said was about that sort of thing. And the mayor has given them all sorts of money to help with that. There's other stuff that I alluded to earlier in the show, facilities stuff, one-time expenses, blinds from Moran, stuff to improve the auditorium for Lyman Hall, things that would not necessarily qualify for bonding, but are still expenses. When you have 12 or 13 buildings, you still have to buy those things and upgrade them. And I think what Sal meant was that's what I alluded to earlier, is the surplus typically in normal years, the 500,000, 600,000 surplus goes toward a lot of those expenses. They buy down on a lot of those expenses. They don't put them in the regular budget. So that's what I think he meant. I know it's risky to ever try to speak for somebody else, but that's how I interpreted it. And that is separate from the bonding that you're describing.
Yeah. So I'm trying to look forward to this time next year, because you and I had talked about this.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun last year. It's even more fun right now.
Yeah. So here we are, let's say in 2021, October, November 2021, and we're faced with the same situation. The Board of Ed, request what they request. It could be a very large sum of money. It just seems that 8 counselors are going to automatically give the board whatever it wants every time. So why are we even discussing this? And when I say that, automatically give it, I think you and I just sort of agreed that they didn't need the 1.6 this year. They didn't need it for the data they presented. They justified the 1.6 request on the grounds that it would defer COVID expenses. But then you look deeper into the numbers, you find that they're getting more than they need based on their own data. And then, the use of existing money, there's this phantom lawsuit of $600,000. And I just think where it's going to go on and on and on. Isn't it just pass an ordinance so they automatically get it? I don't see the council ever denying them even a piece of this. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that it was based on COVID expenses. COVID is the key issue, and they would end up with 500,000 extra after you did that. And I think they did say in the meeting they do like to keep, forget the lawsuit for a second, they like to keep 300,000 to 400,000 around for special education expenses that come up, because special education expenses are a moving target budgetarily as well. Kids place into it throughout the year. There are all sorts of costs. I think there's a couple of let me reframe the issue a little bit. I think there's a couple of root causes here. On the Board of Ed's side, there's a root problem. Sal said this many times last night or 2 nights ago. Well, we don't want to come back to the council. We don't want to come back to you. Just give us the money now. That way we don't have to come back to you. And so that's sort of this almost I don't know if it's philosophical is the right word. Like it's shameful. He has to fall on his sword. Whereas I think you and I might say, come back to us every 2 weeks. If you want to come back to us, and we'll give you the money you need. Because instead what we're doing, I think what you're saying is we're giving them more than they need, based on some, we want to be polite, and they don't want to come back to us. So I think that's one philosophical issue. I think another philosophical issue is they are not spending the money fast enough for some people's satisfaction. And by some people, I mean you. So they put on this slide, the $1.4 million that 1.4 they already had in there before we voted, and you go down the slide and it goes all the way to 0. We're not going to walk through all that. Even I find some of the things on that slide questionable, that they're really not going to spend it that fast. And I think that's the other issue, is don't show that slide. Don't say you're going to spend it to 0, because you've never spent it to 0 in 6 years. Now I looked just very quickly. I did look at the numbers. You gave percentages and averages in the aggregate prior to the other night. The town council has given them just under 3.8 million from their surplus. So 3.8 million is the aggregate number that the town council since 2014 has given them. They've spent 2.4 million of that. So they spent about 64% of that. So I think it's a little more than the numbers you presented. The way I looked at it, it's still not, there's still a big chunk of it there. And as you're going to say, well, we just gave them 1.6. So now the balance is back up. So I think though, I don't think you have to wait till next year to go back to your point that we're sitting here a year from now. I do think it's going to come up at the budget. I think that there are counselors, I'm not going to name names, besides Christina, because she was very vocal. I think there are other counselors who were very sympathetic to what she had to say, but there was a feeling the timing wasn't right with COVID, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and that I think the better time to address this is the budget. Because if you address it at the budget, you can affect their bottom line budget number, which, as we know, is state mandated. Once you give them that number, it's locked in forever. So I think you may see something next spring, is my point.
Oh, I don't think so at all. I don't think Sal Menz has ever come in front of you and you've denied him in whole or in part. It's never going to happen. But I think it's very nice to say, well, we'll address it at the budget. And what addressing at the budget really means is you give him what he wants. That's what it is. The mayor cuts him. Let me finish my thought here. The mayor cuts the Board of Ed's request. And by the time it comes to you, it is allegedly pared down. And despite the mayor's cuts, the Board of Ed ends up with a surplus every year. We've gone through the numbers. So I've heard this before. Well, we'll address it in the future. I've heard that with a pool. One day we'll get around to it. Now it's the Board of Ed budget. During budget time, we'll get strict. I don't think so. I'm going to give you the final word, and then I want to talk about baseball.
Wow. Well, I want to make, again, a few little quick, the Board of Ed budget. The Board of Ed is one of the tightest budgets out there. And you can go back to video footage of me on this show making fun of the Board of Ed because they're rolling in money. But when you actually look at their surplus as a percentage of their budget, they are a much tighter budget than almost every town department. So now they have these big numbers because they're a big budget. But as a percentage of their budget, they actually hit it pretty close to the mark. So I think that I would just remind people of that. And I also say that we did reduce them $100,000 last year. Again, I'm just saying we did reduce them by that much. We reduced the increase. We didn't cut them, but we reduced them by 100,000.
You didn't cut them. Okay.
You can't cut them. The state doesn't let you cut them.
That's right. I just want to make sure you clarified that.
Your state government.
You took the $103 million and you cut it by 100,000. You cut the increase.
Okay. Cut the increase by 100,000. So we'll see. I guess time will tell. Baseball. I mean, baseball. Am I doing this or are you doing this?
Oh, we're both doing this. I mean, what could be more important than baseball? So there's some rule changes that caught your eye. One caught my wife's eye because every time she watches a baseball game with me, it was very rare. If there's something unusual going on, or draw her attention over to the television. If the bases are loaded and 2 outs or something, and somebody gets up to the plate, everyone is spitting. The batter spits, the dugout spits, outfielders spit, and it's revolting. It was, no other sport that I know of, all this spitting. Well, they passed a new rule, which is my favorite rule for Major League Baseball: no spitting. I think they'll survive fine. Your reaction to my thoughts, and then I think you've got some rules that you like, some new rules.
Yeah, I can't argue on the spitting. It's pretty gross. I never really thought about it, but that's an interesting observation by your wife. I can support that. Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of concern with speeding up the game, much like you're always trying to speed up my answers. So in speeding up the game, they've made some rule changes. Then COVID hit and they made more rule changes. So I'm actually going to focus on the COVID changes. I liked the best of 3 in the wild card round. I liked because I think they expanded the playoffs a few years back, and so I like that there's a best out of 3 there. I think I don't think the team with the worst record, the wild card team, I think never gets a home game, which is fair. They have to go on the road, so I like that. I hope they keep the best out of 3 versus just 1 game. The second one, I'll say it kills me. It absolutely kills me to say it. I do like the designated hitter in the National League. That was another COVID. I think COVID inspired change, but I think everyone sort of felt like it was coming. And I think the collective bargaining agreement has 1 more year left. So I think we may lose the DH next year, and then they may negotiate it back for 2022. But it makes the game more, all the reasons, it makes the game more exciting, and it gives more players a chance to play. So fine. Designated hitter.
So let's move on. And I'm going to show you something that you've never seen before. Here we go.
Okay. Yep.
What's in that envelope? You announced the new Citizen Mike Show program. What's going on?
Mike has agreed that I'm usually right, and so it's a signed agreement stipulating that I'm right. So Mike and I talked about, the election and how can we cover the election, and we really didn't want to get into predictions before the fact. So we agreed, well, let's make predictions and let's seal them and let's mail them to each other, and we're going to open them live on the air, I guess, next week. Of course, I already mailed mine because I'm on top of things. But Mike's gonna mail his. I guess we're recording on a Thursday, so I think we're gonna predict 4 races: the presidential race, obviously, the Fishbein Jinx race, the Capone Chicarella race, and Mashinsky Ilbrick. I think those were the 4, with a little commentary, maybe a little rationale for why we picked what we picked. So we're gonna open up. We don't know if Mike thinks he knows what I'm picking. I don't presume to know what Mike's picking.
Wait, hold on one second. I can never figure out what's in your mind. Every time I think you're a rational, reasonable person, you never continue to surprise. Okay.
So it should be fun. I guess if we do it next week, hopefully we know.
Yeah. So are we going to get into trouble with our respective parties here, or
that's I wouldn't be the first time for me. So
or me.
Or you, right? So yeah, that'll be fun though. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. And we could do this. We could have done this on the 2% fund. We could have written in, what do you think the town council will do on the 2% fund? Will it pass? I guess that wouldn't be a mystery. But yeah, this will be fun. I think it'll be fun to see what we both think. Did you get mine yet?
No, I am not. But thinking of this envelope, I just want to go back to this 2% fund. Just for a minute. I think we should do the same thing. The next time this comes up in front of the council, what to do with the 2% fund. And we'll put something in an envelope. We'll get all the data, try to get all the data from Sal Menzo a few days in advance so we can think about it. Follow the data, because the data, should be self-explanatory. It should be complete enough so you can make up your own mind. And then put in an envelope what you think the best thing should do before he makes his presentation. Then he makes the presentation, and then, everyone's knees gets weak and they, give more than what's in the envelope. I kind of like that idea. Like going in to, Tuesday's meeting, I was thinking, 1.6 is really high, be generous, more generous than you've ever been before, and give them $1 million. And they would have been happy with that. That would have worked, but oh no. Anyway, I want to talk now about my favorite playwright.
You don't want to talk about your favorite playwright. I want to talk about my favorite playwright.
I hate Eugene O'Neill.
Yeah.
He's depressing and dark. Drunk.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, I discovered O'Neill in college, taking some courses, and then when I got my master's, which is a literature,
Was your medication stabilized when you
he's the father of American drama.
Oh God.
And I read a lot, as I don't know if people realize that I like to read, and I couldn't put this book down. I was reading it recently, and it's by Women Possessed. It's a biography of O'Neill by the Gelbs, Barbara and Arthur Gelb. They're drama critics. They both passed away, but they've written. This was their 3rd crack at an O'Neill biography. Why would you write 3 biographies? Well, the reason you'd write it is because they had access to papers and letters and diaries that they didn't have in the 70s when they wrote their first one, and then they didn't. They just got more access. So especially O'Neill's 3rd wife, Carlotta, was very kind of a keeper of his stuff. So I couldn't put it down, which makes me weird, I guess. But I thought I'd just recommend it. I think the process of writing a biography is antithetical to what we do, not you and me, but the world is social media, it's tweets, it's instant gratification, it's everything's instant. And I think biography is deliberate, and like you know more now than you knew then. So I thought it was an interesting thing. And O'Neill has a connection to Wallingford. He was actually his decision to become a playwright, which much to your chagrin was made while he was at Gaylord in 1912, recovering from tuberculosis. And the Wallingford Community Theater actually he wrote a play about Gaylord called The Straw that they put on, I think, in April of 14 or 15. Which was a great play, a great performance. So I'm a huge fan of O'Neill, and just latest book I've read, and I just wanted to push it. You're right, though. He's not the most uplifting. He's kind of like the you. When I mean, you're not really uplifting when it comes to local government either. So you maybe similar people don't. Maybe that's what's going on here, because he's the Brzezinski of drama.
Well, those are fighting words.
He's never
but
happy, just like you. He's never happy.
Those are fighting words. I think we got to sign off and close the show. Look forward to next time. Thanks everyone for watching the Citizen Mike Show. And although he'll never say it, Chris Chartel thanks you too. And we want to thank WPAA for putting the Citizen Mike Show on their channel. And they broadcast at 9 at night on Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, then Saturday morning at 10. So you can always catch it on TV. Catch Citizen Mike Show on TV. Good night, Chris. Good night, everyone. See you next week.